Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
When I first got the keys to my new place, it felt like a dream come true. I had finally escaped the suffocating grip of an HOA, or so I thought. The townhouse was in an unincorporated area, which I figured meant a little more freedom. No one breathing down my neck about the color of my front door or the length of my grass. But as it turns out, there was a catch, a big one. The place wasn't exactly HOA-free. It was part of a townhouse association which, while technically different from an HOA, might as well have been the same beast with a different name. The association agreement had a nifty little clause that required any potential purchaser to sign an assumption agreement before the title transfer. That meant you had to agree to take on all the seller's obligations, including joining the association. No signature, no sale. Simple as that. Well, the board must have been napping when my paperwork came through because they missed that minor detail. I never signed the assumption agreement, yet somehow they went ahead and approved the title transfer. The moment I found out, a grin spread across my face that I couldn't wipe off if I tried. They'd screwed up big time, and I was now the proud owner of a townhouse without being shackled to the association. At first, I thought it was a clerical error, something they'd catch and fix before I could even unpack. But nope, the board didn't seem to realize their colossal blunder. They handed me the keys and probably didn't even give it a second thought. It turns out that they had just lost the only leverage they had over me. I decided to keep my mouth shut, not wanting to draw attention to the oversight. Instead, I settled into my new place, enjoying the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd slipped through their bureaucratic fingers. But as the days passed, I started to wonder what this really meant. I did some research, contacted a lawyer friend, and the more I learned, the more the situation amused me. Legally, I owned the property outright, but because I hadn't signed that agreement, I wasn't technically a member of the Townhouse Association. And since I hadn't agreed to join, they couldn't force me to. They'd lost their chance when they approved the title transfer. Without that assumption agreement, their power over me was as good as dead. The kicker, I wasn't just a rogue homeowner now. I was a tenant in common with the entire association. In layman's terms, this meant that for any decision the association wanted to make that affected the property, especially if it was going to cost me money, I had to agree. Otherwise, it was a no-go. I had inadvertently given myself veto power over the board and every other owner in the community. It was like I was holding the remote to their TV, and they didn't even know it yet. I wasn't just free from their rules. I had the potential to disrupt their entire operation. I could already picture the looks on their faces when they finally realized what they'd done. But I wasn't in a hurry to enlighten them. Why spoil the fun? A couple of weeks passed before the board finally caught wind of what had happened. I received a politely worded letter from the association president, Karen. Of course her name was Karen, asking me to rectify the situation by signing the assumption agreement retroactively. Her tone was sugary sweet, but the underlying message was clear. They wanted their power back, and they expected me to just hand it over. I ignored the letter at first, letting it sit on my kitchen counter while I pondered my next move. After all, what were they going to do? They couldn't untransfer the title, and they certainly couldn't force me to sign something I hadn't agreed to in the first place. Karen, however, wasn't the type to give up easily. Another letter arrived, this one less polite, hinting at potential consequences if I didn't comply. Now, I'm not one to back down from a fight, especially not when I'm in the right, but I had no intention of turning this into a full-blown legal battle. I decided to have a little fun instead. I called Karen directly, and as soon as she heard my voice, I could sense her irritation simmering beneath her professional demeanor. I played dumb, pretending I hadn't received her letters, which only made her more flustered. Oh, those must have gotten lost in the mail. You know how unreliable the postal service can be these days, I said, barely suppressing a laugh. Karen wasn't amused. She launched into a spiel about how important it was for the integrity of the community that all owners be members of the association. How it was in everyone's best interest that I signed the agreement, blah blah blah. I let her talk, occasionally throwing in a non-committal or I see, just to keep her going. When she finally paused for breath, I decided to drop the bombshell. You know, Karen, I've been doing some research, and it turns out there's nothing you can do to make me sign that agreement now. You had your chance before the title transfer, but now, well, let's just say I'm in a pretty unique position. The silence on the other end of the line was priceless. I could practically hear the gears in Karen's head grinding to a halt as she processed what I'd just said. "What do you mean?" she finally asked, her voice a little less confident than before. "I mean, I own the property, but I'm not part of your association. Legally, I'm a tenant in common with the association, not with the other owners. So, any decisions that affect the property or would cost me money, yeah, you need my approval for those." Karen's response was immediate and predictable. She sputtered and stammered, trying to regain her composure, but it was clear she hadn't anticipated this. She tried to argue that I was still bound by the rules of the association, but I wasn't having any of it. I calmly explained that without the assumption agreement, their rules didn't apply to me. "I'm afraid that's not how this works, Karen," I said, savoring the moment. "You see, the only power you had to force me into the association was withholding the title transfer. But since you approved it without my signature, there's really nothing left for you to do. I'm not bound by your rules, and you can't compel me to join." I could almost hear her grinding her teeth on the other end of the line. There was a long pause before she finally spoke again, her tone much icier than before. "This isn't over," she said. "We'll see about this." And with that, she hung up. I had to admit that little exchange left me feeling pretty smug. But I knew this was just the beginning. Karen wasn't the type to roll over and accept defeat, and I had no doubt she'd be scheming with the other board members to find a way to get their control back. The funny thing was, the more they pushed, the more I realized just how much power I actually had in this situation. And I wasn't about to give it up without a fight. Over the next few weeks, things started to heat up. Karen and the board sent more letters, each one more desperate than the last. They threatened fines, legal action, even hinted at foreclosure. But it was all bluster. My lawyer friend assured me they didn't have a leg to stand on. Without that assumption agreement, they were barking up the wrong tree. The best part, I started getting wind of the gossip swirling around the neighborhood. The other owners were catching on that something was up, and speculation was running wild. Some thought I was some kind of legal mastermind who had found a loophole to exploit the system. Others assumed I was just a lucky idiot who had no idea what I was doing. But one thing was clear. I had become the talk of the town, and Karen was not happy about it. It wasn't long before the board decided to call a special meeting to discuss the situation. I wasn't officially invited, of course, since I wasn't a member of the association, but I showed up anyway. After all, as a legal owner, I had every right to attend and voice my opinion. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with fluorescent lighting that did nothing to soften the tension in the air. The board members sat at a long table at the front of the room, with Karen right in the middle, glaring at me as I walked in. The other owners were seated in rows of folding chairs, whispering among themselves as I took a seat near the back. Karen wasted no time getting to the point. She launched into a long-winded explanation of the association's rules and how important it was for everyone to comply. She didn't mention me by name, but it was obvious who she was talking about. Her voice dripped with barely concealed contempt as she described the serious issue facing the community. "And so," she concluded, "it's imperative that we take action to ensure that all owners are held to the same standards. We cannot allow one individual to undermine the integrity of this association." I could feel the eyes of the other owners on me as Karen spoke, but I wasn't about to let her have the last word. As soon as she opened the floor for comments, I stood up and cleared my throat. "Excuse me, Karen, but I think it's important to clarify a few things," I began, my voice calm but firm. "First of all, I'm not trying to undermine anything. I simply didn't sign the assumption agreement, and the board approved the title transfer anyway. That's on you, not me." The room fell silent as I spoke, and Karen's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen before, but I wasn't done. "Second," I continued, "I'm well within my legal rights to refuse to sign anything now. The board had their chance and they missed it. So as far as I'm concerned, this issue is resolved." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't finished yet. "Lastly," I said, turning to address the other owners, "I want to make it clear that I have no intention of causing problems for anyone, but I'm not going to be bullied into signing something I don't have to. The board made a mistake, and now they're trying to make me pay for it. That's not going to happen." There was a murmur of agreement from a few of the owners, but Karen wasn't about to back down. She stood up, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "This isn't about bullying," she snapped. "It's about fairness. Everyone else in this community has to follow the rules, and you should be no different," I shrugged. "Fairness works both ways, Karen. If the board had followed their own rules, we wouldn't be in this situation. But they didn't, And now here we are. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen looked like she was about to explode, but before she could say anything else, one of the other board members, a guy named Tom, stood up and tried to play peacemaker. "Look, let's all just take a step back," Tom said, raising his hands in a calming gesture. "We need to figure out a solution that works for everyone. Maybe there's a way to come to some kind of agreement." But Karen wasn't having it. She shot Tom a withering look and turned back to me. "There's only one solution," she hissed. "You sign the agreement, or there will be consequences." I raised an eyebrow. "Consequences like what?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "You'll see." With that, she stormed out of the room, leaving the rest of us in stunned silence. The other board members looked around awkwardly, unsure of what to do next. Tom cleared his throat and tried to regain control of the meeting, but it was clear that the mood had shifted. The owners were no longer just curious. They were starting to get angry, and not at me. As I left the clubhouse that night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Karen might have thought she could intimidate me, but all she'd done was dig herself a deeper hole. The more she pushed, the more the other owners started to see through her power trip, and the best part, this was far from over. Did they? I'm not sure they know the full ramifications of this, if I'm understanding it correctly. It sounds like OP is 50% share, and then everyone else under the association is 50%. Does that mean if there is some big cost, OP has now 50% responsibility to it, like it works with condo voting when weighted, and my deed set up as tenant in common with the spouse? He also doesn't have effective veto. He just has the same say, and they will be deadlocked and court hash it out, which also sounds expensive for OP if they don't just roll over. For examples, let's assume the association owns the roads and it is time to pave them. It comes to a total of $500,000. The association has to come up with $250,000. OP has to come up with $250,000 themselves. He votes no, of course, and they are deadlocked, so the association asks for mediation, and now OP has expensive legal bills and a $250,000 debt on top. Because mediation, they will lose here. No mediation is going to pick OP's no. OP probably also has to approve sales now and exposing themselves to personal lawsuits if they refuse when again they are deadlocked on votes. It just doesn't seem like a win unless you have screw money. Funny still, and I might torture them briefly, but I think I'd want it fixed. I mean, he is still attached to the hip with that association. That's what I instantly thought of as well. There are certain things that an HOA should do, especially in a townhouse association that is probably responsible for the outside structures. This is a with great power comes great responsibility. To OP, I'd make sure that the things that need to get fixed do. You don't want to delay maintenance on something that causes a major issue down the road that costs a lot more. However, where HOAs really go downhill is when they start to become control freaks. And this is where OP can shine. Make sure they don't enact any BS or assess any special assessments for personal pet projects. OP is in a great position here and can essentially run the HOA. Typical HOA BS. These power-hungry jerks think they can control every little thing about our lives. Paint colors, plants, flags, give me a break. It's my property. I paid for it. Good on this guy for finding a loophole. Maybe now the rest of the neighborhood will wake up and realize how ridiculous these rules are. HOAs are just a way for nosy neighbors to feel important and boss everyone around. I bet that Karen has nothing better to do than measure people's grass with a ruler. And those fees, highway robbery, they're probably using that money for fancy dinners and not actually improving anything. I hope this guy stands his ground and doesn't give in to their bullying. Maybe he can use his new veto power to get rid of some of these stupid rules. It's about time someone stood up to these mini dictators. If I ever buy a house, you can bet I'm staying far away from any neighborhood with an HOA. Freedom over fascism, baby.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.